Discipleship and Associate Pastor at Foundry Church. I am really glad to be with you here today for this time of devotion and checking in, and just want to offer a few words of thanks. I continue to be so amazed and blessed by all the ways you're showing up in leadership right now, those of you who call Foundry home. And it's a real gift to be able to see all the pictures you're posting and the stories you're sharing and the thanks that you've been offering, let alone the groups that you lead and the amazing ministries you're supporting. A special shout out, number one, for our small group leaders, our teachers, and our extended clergy team for all the amazing ministry you're making happen. And the patience has been extraordinary. Speaking for myself, at least, seminary does not train you to be an IT specialist, pastoral counselor, and televangelist, y'all. And so many of you have shown so much grace as we've picked up all those hats, as I've picked up all those hats, and more. If you're watching right now, I also want to give out a special shout out to our ops team and encourage you to sound off in the comments if you've been blessed by the way that Foundry's been able to show up in this season. They are helping resource and champion our ministries in some really amazing ways. And I know that at least for our small groups and our classes and things like that, there's not a thing that we've been doing, that I've been doing, that would be possible without them. So, if you get a minute after today's devotion and you've been blessed by the ways that Foundry is showing up in this season, send them an email and let them know how thankful you are. Also, just want to let you know that if you're planning on joining us for Sunday, you're in for a real treat. We'll be hearing a mission moment from Foundry's own Jackie Wright Martin, one of our staff folk and longtime leaders, as we think together about Earth Sunday. And there's going to be an invitation time for you to be able to make some commitments for ways that you want to show up in caring for creation. And so I hope that you'll begin to think about those, let that kind of sit and percolate a little bit as we enter into worship together on Sunday. So on to a time of devotion. I've been thinking a lot about what to share today. And I keep being drawn again and again to this profound truth that's shaping my quarantine life. And maybe you're like me in this, so feel free to let me know in the comments if you're like me. But y'all, I hate notification bubbles on my smart devices. There is nothing in this world that distracts and distresses me more than that bright red, at least for you iPhone users out there. Reminder on my smartphone screen that I have failed to do a thing, respond to a thing, address a thing, or realize a thing. And that buzzing, blinking, pinging process in which they're drawing me away from whatever it is in the moment I'm doing is more distracting than getting hit in the head with a wet pew cushion, which if you've ever talked to any of my colleagues at Foundry, you'll know has happened a time or two in my ministry. What I've come to realize as I've been thinking about these things and about these technological nemesis of mine is that they have a really funny way of sending my already anxious self into overdrive. The world's constant access to my time and my life, especially in this season when I'm teleworking, triggers both a profound fear of failing to attend to all the people and the work that I love and my tendency, and I'm sure there are one or two of you out there who are this way too, to reduce my own worth and place in the world to my ability to do all the things and perform perfectly all the time. The red bubbles in and of themselves really aren't the problem. It's the way that they send me into this frenetic spiral that's ultimately rooted in my need to perform and be perfect and provide all the things for all the people so that they don't doubt that I'm capable or worthy or worth having around. Did you hear that last part? I mean, that's what really hit home for me, at least, is that all that frenetic, frantic responsiveness, reaction, engagement, it has far little to do, more often than not, with the thing to which I'm responding. It has a lot more to do with the way I see and value myself and other people's perceptions of me. Ultimately, even when it's born out of the desire to do well, to show love, to be present, or like I said in last week's devotion, to be in control, this frenetic, frantic response results in resentment and weariness and self-deprecation. The people and projects represented by all those red bubbles become objects of anger and frustration and ultimately my own sense of failure when I can't keep up. And that's really not on them. The bubbles didn't do it. My messages didn't do it. My unanswered emails didn't do it. What did it is the way that I'm engaging them. Those 99 bubbles that never go away if I let them can alter my entire sense of self and the ways that I'm showing up for others. And rather than the good that I think I'm accomplishing with all that responsiveness, all that presence, all that hard work, if I'm not careful, those little red bubbles wind up stealing life and snatching joy and seizing control of how I'm showing up in the world instead. I'm reminded of the story about Jesus' visit to the home of Mary and Martha in the Gospel according to Luke. Some of you may know it. Jesus shows up, and while Martha is distracted by all the needs and societal demands of hosting Jesus and frantically and faithfully attending to all the details, her sister Mary is instead sitting in a posture of attentiveness and openness toward Jesus. And when Martha, caught up in her own anxiety, makes a move to point out Mary's apparent lack of effort, Jesus simply responds. And this got to me this week. You are worried and distracted by many things. There's only need of one thing. There's only need of one thing. I wonder in this era of COVID-19 if you, like me, are finding yourself inundated with distraction. If you find your relationships with people whom you normally love and with work that you certainly are normally kind of very passionate about, suddenly perverted by a sense of resentment, or projects or places that once brought you deep joy suddenly feeling full of grief and exhaustion, I wonder if perhaps it's not because the people have changed or the work that you do is suddenly different, but if instead in this season when we're surrounded by screens and notifications and news alerts and stuck in spaces which don't even allow us to escape the constant demands of whatever your little red bubbles might be, are distracting us from the one thing. I wonder. And whatever that one thing is for you in this moment of your journey as a disciple, whether it's a sense of self-worth outside of the work that you do, a connection to the passion and purpose you bring to your work, whatever it might be, groundedness in the constant attentiveness of God for whose love we don't have to work, or just kind of basic awareness of what you're feeling and what you need. I wonder if in this moment, the Lord of life, Jesus, whose resurrection power Pastor Kelly reminded us this week we get to celebrate for the next 50 days, might not be inviting you into God's presence, calling you by name and saying, look, don't be worried and distracted by the little things. Don't be consumed by the calls and the texts and the emails and the demands of a world that is feeling just as inundated and tired and grief-stricken and guilty as you are. There is need, beloved, of only one thing. Rest here with me and remember it. How might how you're feeling in these days, how you're showing up in your relationships with a spouse, with your friends, with your family change, if you were able to let go of the little distractions, the spaces and places where you're finding yourself pulled away? What might it look like for you to center yourself in the one thing, God's love for you? I think that as we live into the days ahead, the rituals and rhythms that allow us to do that are more important now than ever. If you, like me, are finding it hard to turn off all the stuff and to remember the one thing, I want to invite you to consider creating some patterns or practices that might help you turn off the distractions and worries periodically throughout the day. And I've gathered up some of these from servant leaders and small group leaders and friends in ministry that I know. The first thing that I keep hearing is that space hygiene right now, space hygiene is more important than ever. And what that really means is having dedicated spaces that you're using for a thing so that the other things don't bleed over into it. If you're like me, my workstation is on my dining room table and I can see it from just about every vantage point in my tiny little condo. And so maybe it's helpful. One of the things that I've started to do is I've got a recliner in my living room, and that's my reading recliner. And the only thing that I do in it is I read for fun and I do my devotions. And that has become a set apart space for me that work is not allowed to enter. So maybe consider how you're practicing space hygiene, how you're letting a room or a space be for work, and how you're not letting work spill over into those other spaces. You know, we've been inviting people too, as we're thinking about this space hygiene thing, to create worshipful spaces in their homes, spaces where we're gathering objects and items which draw us back into the wholeness and the fullness of worship. You'll see mine kind of behind me here. I've got a cross on it with some plants and some candles. And when I look on that space, it's a reminder to pull myself out of all the other distractions and stuff and focus on the one thing for me. One of the other things that people are talking a lot about these days are ritualizing routines. And so, really what that means is allowing the routines that already shape the pattern of your day to become rituals that are inviting you to deeper awareness about joy, about life, about places where you're experiencing hope. One of the things that I've been doing is I've got a practice of reminding myself of the one thing that I'm excited about doing in the day ahead. And that thing changes, but I start my day that way as a reminder to focus on joy throughout the day. So that when all the other stuff happens, when I'm feeling lonely or I'm feeling really heavily laden with grief, I can remember that there's a thing which brings joy that's either coming or that I have to hold on to that I've already experienced in the day. Think about things like the coffee that you're making in the morning or the pattern of making your bed as an opportunity to pray, or at least take out your headphones and move away from your computer and your phone and your iPad and your smartwatch and all the other things, and let that routine, as simple and easy as it might be a space to get some perspective on what matters and to let go of what doesn't. Another thing that I think is helpful as we're thinking about ritualizing routine that folks have talked about is putting these things in your calendar. I've gotten to where I'm scheduling out the parts of my day where I need to do a thing, because I know that if I'm sitting in front of my computer where I'm going to get a calendar notification, if I'm not going to be able to pull myself away from or out of the work that I'm doing, I've got that reminder. And then finally, as we're thinking about ritualizing routine, Christianity's been very good about this over the last 2,000 years. We have all kinds of spiritual disciplines to draw from reflective reading of the scripture to fasting to kind of all kinds of things in between. We're going to be posting some videos starting on Saturday from the Discipleship Ministries team on reflectively reading the Psalms. And so we invite you to use those as you think about how you might ritualize some of your day or develop some practices, some rituals that allow you to remember the one thing for you in this season. The next thing that I hear a lot about, my friend Kirk, my colleague Kirk and I were talking a little bit about this today, is just remember that you're human. It's so easy for us when we're surrounded by work, when we're inundated with stuff, when we're carrying the grief of a world that is as crazy as ours feels right now, to forget that we have needs. And so spending the time to attend to the sleep we need, when we need to eat, when we need to pause and avoid the hanger, are all critical ways that we're helping refocus and recenter ourselves in a season when it feels like there's not a lot to remain centered and rooted in. And the last thing that I would offer that I think has been helpful for me in remembering the one thing, and I know may be helpful for you, is kind of finding ways to remember that other people around you are human too. When you're engaging with colleagues, try to build some time to acknowledge their humanity. I was blessed yesterday by a text from a colleague who just said thank you out of the blue for no reason other than to say thank you. And I felt recognized and I felt seen. And it made me realize that despite all the other stuff that made me feel otherwise, there was something to be thankful for. There was something that I was doing that was making a difference. And people need that from us too. So take the time to recognize that folks are humans. Ask them how they're doing. Offer words of encouragement or support as a way to step out of some of the freneticism and the frantic pace of the world that we're living in right now. Manage your own expectations. This is a hard one for me. No one, I don't think, out there is intentionally trying to fail anybody else, cause us to stumble, hold us up, or hinder us. We're all dealing with this moment that we're in as best we can. And I'm gifted by the leadership of Pastor Ginger, who reminds our team regularly and often that we should take care of number 1 and 2, so that we're making sure that our grace tank, the tank of energy that we have to devote to being graceful and present and aware, is full enough to lead with grace in all the ways we're showing up and to offer an extra measure of grace during this season especially. And then the final thing that I think is helpful as we think about how to remain focused on the one thing and not distracted by the many things is to just be aware of how we're feeling before we enter a space with other people. Now more than ever, it's so easy to feel like we're stuck with our own thoughts and perspectives and emotions, that we know them really well, when in fact, oftentimes, we're not giving ourselves the space to realize when that weariness we're feeling is actually grief. We've heard a devotion about that in the last couple of weeks. Or when the anger that we're feeling is actually sorrow. So carve some time out in your day to really sit with yourself and ask yourself the kinds of questions that are going to help you know where you are in any given day, so that when you're showing up for other people, you're doing so in a way that fully embraces that gift of grace that we just got done talking about. You know, friends, as we go through this season, whether it's an issue where you're struggling with the red bubbles and the frantic pace of it all, or you're feeling okay, I hope what you know above all else is that you are beautiful, beloved children of God. And that is the one thing that we have to hold on to, that no matter how we're coming to this moment in our life together, God has claimed us and named us God's own. And there's nothing that we can or can't do that's going to change that. I hope that is a hope that you can hold on to. And I look forward to being with you again soon. Thank you for joining me today. Take care. Bye-bye.